Hello everyone, my name is Oshin Vartanian from the University of Toronto. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to start by thanking organizers to actually allow us to put together a symposium on neuroscience of architecture, officially entitled Architecture and Neuroaesthetics. There will be 3 speakers in this session, and it looks like I'll be the first one to start. So the title of my talk is Behavior and Neural Responses to Architectural Design, and this is sort of going to be the overview for my talk. Because most of this work is being done under a general rubric of neuroaesthetics, I want to spend a couple of minutes actually talking about what neuroaesthetics is really all about and what some of the main goals and functions of the field at the moment are defined as. Then I'm going to say a little bit about why it's sort of interesting to care about the neuroscience of architecture over and above the psychology of architecture. Of course, I'm trained as a psychologist, even though my training is in brain imaging. First and foremost, behavior is very important, but it's something to be added by neuroscience. I think it's sort of now beginning to really show its value. Then I'll talk about some psychology, working psychological science about 2 basic design features that have been shown to affect aesthetic preference. One of them is contour, and the other one is ceiling height. So I'm going to review some of the work in psychology, then I'm going to talk about some of the implications of this work for architecture and design, and then I'll talk about an fMRI study that we did to see how contour and ceiling height affect brain function and the behavior that we observe. Okay? Finally, if I have time, I think I might be a little bit too optimistic in this sense, but if I have time, I also want to touch on some of the really nice work that's been done on how expertise in architecture actually affects brain function while people are looking at things like buildings and so forth. So I think this work really adds a different level of nuance to the whole area of research. And of course, if there's still more time, I'll make some closing comments. Okay, so what is neuroaesthetics all about? So neuroaesthetics, as the name suggests, is basically an effort to understand the neural basis of our aesthetic preferences, okay? So some of the questions that we sort of care about in this area are, how does emotion affect the different kinds of preferences that we have, okay? Another major question in this area are, for example, do things like aesthetic preferences arise following very fast intuitive responses, or do they really take a lot of time and are more deliberative in nature? Okay? We know from almost 100 years of work in empirical aesthetics that a person's formal training very strongly affects what they like and how they think about things. And of course, we want to see how this formal training is instantiated in brain function. Essentially, if formal training is going to have some kind of an effect on behavior, that should be detectable at the level of the brain. All right? And of course, we also really care about some of the long-term evolutionary questions. For example, in the field of neuroaesthetics, not only do we study buildings, but we also, for example, study paintings, different kinds of objects that we like and don't like, and of course, we also study, for example, faces. So a major question you may want to ask if you're in this field is, for example, if I find a particular face attractive, what are some of the signals that are actually leading me to find that face attractive, and can those signals be detectable at the level of brain function? Okay. Similarly, in terms of the environments that people like, so in a lot of these studies, we, for example, show people pictures of different kinds of spaces. They have to tell us how beautiful they find them, if they want to approach them or not. And then we try and figure out what it is about the space from an evolutionary perspective that makes them more appealing to the user and observer. Okay, so this is the background. Now, Oshin Chatterjee and I, a couple of years ago, have proposed an overarching model that tries to encapsulate the different kinds of factors that lead to how aesthetic experience emerges out of different kinds of phenomena, okay? So we essentially group this entire repository of knowledge under 3 different systems, each of which interacts with other systems to actually bring about aesthetic outcomes. So one of them is emotional valuation. So there's loads and loads of research now to show that a lot of our aesthetic preferences are driven by how we feel and the emotions and reward mechanisms that we experience. And the really big difference that I will talk about at the level of the brain between liking and wanting, which tends to be a very interesting determinant of what we find aesthetically pleasing. Okay? Then there is the second group of phenomena that Hyun Chu will talk about when she's up later, having more to do with sensory motor processes. So for example, what's happening at the level of brain sensation, perception. The work on mirror neurons is very big here, okay? For example, the experience of empathy is very big there. And finally, something that's already been touched on quite a few times has to do with the contribution of knowledge meaning systems such as expertise, context, and culture to neuroaesthetic phenomena. So a very important thing that I want to emphasize here is that, for people who do work in neuroaesthetics, we really do care about meaning, and we do care about culture and we do care about experience. But we try to find various kinds of neural correlates for these, either in terms of brain structure or brain function. So in other words, if a person's behavior is going to be influenced by meaning, the meaning has to be instantiated at the level of the brain at some level. Okay, and then you go searching for that. So I think in some ways, I think some criticism has been made of this field in the sense that it tends to be a bit too reductionistic because it tends to reduce everything to biological phenomena. I think in some ways, actually, people in this field are very careful not to forget the very, very important contribution that things like meaning and culture make to what we do and don't prefer. Okay? Now, why care about the neuroscience of architecture? I think a lot of this stuff has already been talked about in this already in this day. So we spend about 90% of our time indoors. Therefore, it's important for us to actually know what are some of the factors about the built environment which influence the way we think, feel, and behave. Now, interestingly, most of the remaining 10% is actually spent commuting between indoor environments, which I think is actually even more interesting. Okay? So we also have this strong intuition that has already been mentioned a number of times today, that the built environments that we live in actually do influence the way we think, feel, and behave. Okay? Now, it just so happens that some of the most important contributions that psychology and neuroscience have made to understanding human behavior over the last, especially maybe 20 or 30 years, has to do with how context affects behavior. So there's been already some fantastic summary chapters of this work in various kinds of books on judgment and decision making about how the maturity of various kinds of field of psychology can really be measured as a function of how context specific the effects are that they define. Okay? And because our field has a lot of contributions made to understanding context, the environment can be one of those contextual factors that one can manipulate in different kinds of experimental designs and pursue the effects on the brain. Okay, the kernel of the study that I'm going to be talking about today really was born out of a meeting in Germany 6 years ago that happened in Dresden. I'm a member of this lovely organization called the International Association of Empirical Aesthetics. I urge everyone to sign up because it's a really fun thing to be a part of. We meet every 2 years. It's pretty much every single person who does any kind of experimental empirical work on aesthetics is a part of this group, okay? This particular meeting in Dresden was unique because very purposefully brought together psychologists, neuroscientists, designers, and architects, much like this forum has done, to kind of force some kind of a dialogue. The meeting was about 4 days long, and a lot of good stuff came out of that meeting by virtue of the fact that we kind of got a chance to actually talk to each other and see what some of our mutual concerns are. Okay? And out of this work, we wanted to do work on the neuroscience of architecture. And of course, the question is, well, what kind of factors do you want to study within the context of architecture? The factors that we had to choose had to be behaviorally studied in advance because you want to pick essentially what's called a low-hanging fruit, okay? You want to go for effects that you know are at least behaviorally robust that you can then try and replicate within the fMRI scanner. And the first effect that almost everyone was very, very excited about is this effect of contour. Now, there is experimental work in psychology going back almost 100 years, in the early 20s, one of the most fascinating set of studies that you can read, that has very, very consistently shown that people prefer curves over angular designs, okay? It's surprising how a lot of the studies that were published in the 20s and 30s on this in some ways behaviorally mimic exactly what's being done now, but of course we use now more modern technology and stimuli. Okay? In some of the new studies, we've shown that this is true for lines, it's true for abstract shapes, it's true for common objects, it's true for car interiors. Very good friends of mine last year showed it's even true in great apes, okay? Kids who are infants actually, who are less than 24 months old, they choose for curved objects rather than angular objects. It's remarkably consistent, and there's almost 100 years of data on that, all right? Now, last few years, the work has involved stimuli that are a bit more interest to this audience. For example, people have looked at interior design, it's true, okay? And when you ask people, why is it that you choose the curved object, in this case, the curved room, the recurrent theme is that it makes them feel better. It seems to be an emotionally driven response that's underlying choice for curvature, okay? Another study that was done in Holland a couple of years ago, for example, design of airport spaces. Not only is curvature the most important factor in what kind of airport spaces people like, it's also, amongst all the other ones, explains the most amount of variance in people's judgments, okay? So even in airport spaces, it's true. Now, the question is, why is it that people prefer curved objects? And here's where I think neuroscience actually has a contribution to make, okay? The why part of this whole question. So, is it that there's something about sharp objects that people find threatening? threatening and therefore they withdraw from them, or is it they're actually drawn to curved objects in terms of motivation behavior, okay? And as it so happens with almost everything in psychology, it's a bit of each, okay? So this is a series of very, very important studies that were published in Psychological Science and thereafter in an fMRI study that were done by Barr and Nata, where they showed people a bunch of stimuli that were either sharp or curved, okay? And some of them are real-life objects with semantic connotations. The other ones are abstract shapes that have no meaning, okay? So they were able to replicate the fact that when people are given choices and have to pick the one that they like more, they consistently choose the one that's curved, okay? Well, that part was not surprising. The next part is much more interesting. They had people go into the fMRI scanner and make the exact same choices there, okay? Number one, they got the exact same behavioral response, so the effect was robust. Number two, when people are looking at sharp objects, the area of the brain that's activated more compared to when they're looking at curved objects is the amygdala, okay? So anyone who does work in neuroscience, and even if you're a psychologist, you'd know that what the amygdala really tends to code for is perception of threat. So for example, if you were suffering from arachnophobia, I have you go into the fMRI scanner and I show you a spider, it activates the amygdala, okay? So the inference that they made based on this data was that it's not so much that we like curved objects, it's more that we're actually drawn away from sharp objects, because there's probably a good evolutionary reason for us to have actually associated sharp objects with sense of threat and danger, and it stayed with us over time. So right now we're seeing people being drawn to round objects, but the reason for it is actually a very old evolutionary reason that's still affecting brain function. Okay? So these set of studies came out, there was huge amounts of interest about them everywhere. We read them several times and we thought they were very great. However, Letizia Palumba has now done some really nice work now with mannequin, which is a really standard procedure we use in the psychology lab, where people are shown different kinds of objects, and using a mouse or a cursor, they can actually move the person away or towards various kinds of things. And she's shown that, so remember, the Barr and Nata had shown that people prefer curvature almost by default. It's because they actually shy away from sharp objects. But she's shown using a couple of really nice studies that have provided new behavioral data that people are also really drawn to curved objects. So they approach them and they approach them faster. In other words, the reason why we have a preference for curvature tends to be a combination of the fact that we find sharp objects somewhat threatening and we find round objects somewhat appealing. And the combination of those two things drive judgment in the same direction. All right? But the important thing to take away from all of this work is that feelings and emotions tend to be the underlying driver for both kind of effects. All right? So the conclusion of the literature and contour is that people like curved objects, and they tend to like them because they affect the way they feel. That's conclusion number one, okay? Now in terms of ceiling height, okay, we know that the standard ceiling in North America is 2.44 meters. Everyone likes to have higher ceilings. I paid a lot more for my condo for that very reason. Okay, so this is a classic study that was done from 1978. It's a very nice series of studies that were done by Baird, but actually looked at the ceiling height and different kinds of preferences that people have, and they were able to find that when ceiling height is about maybe 9 to 10 feet, people like that particular height the most. The really great thing about this study, even though it was done in the 1970s, but I think it's probably one of the best eras in psychology research, is that, so of course they had people look at different kinds of pictures, they picked the ones that they liked the most, and of course they liked maybe 9 or 10 feet high ceilings the most. But then they also had people go into a room where they could actually manually adjust the height of the ceiling, and they got the exact same effect. I think it's remarkable, you know? So there's something to be said about that. Okay? Of course, we know about all the classic work by Andrea Palladio when he talked about ceiling height, but of course he really situated this in terms of, it's not necessarily ceiling height that's important, it's the proportion of the room that's important. Okay? So we know that to actually perceive proportion in spaces, it's going to draw on visual spatial system in the brain. In other words, if it is true that people prefer higher ceilings to lower ceilings, that effect should be observable within the brain system that actually underlies visual spatial exploration of spaces. All right? Okay, so how about the fMRI study? Very straightforward study, but people go into the fMRI scanner, they went through 2 different runs. In one run, they saw different kinds of images, they manipulated them in terms of contour, in terms of ceiling height, and in terms of perceived enclosure, and they had to indicate whether the space that they were looking at was either beautiful or not beautiful. Okay, a very simple binary choice. In the other run, they had to make the exact same, they saw a different set of stimuli, again making binary judgments, but then they had to indicate whether they actually wanted to enter or exit the room. Okay, so we have an approach avoidance run, and an aesthetic assessment run, of course, counterbalanced across subjects. Okay? So the basic prediction that we had was that people looking at curved spaces would find them more beautiful and they would opt to enter them. Also, people looking at rooms with higher ceilings would find them more beautiful and opt to enter them. All right? Now, as many people have already said, I'm a small bit player in all the research that was done here. It's actually I've been very lucky to have got very good collaborators to work with. So for this particular study, it's a big bunch of us, many psychologists in the US and Spain and Austria, but we also have some really good architects and designers from Denmark who actually contribute all of their image sets to this study. So a good bit of advice I have for you, if you want to get good fMRI studies on architecture, befriend architects in Denmark, because they're everywhere there. Okay? They don't care about the fact that all I want to talk about is Lego, all right? Yeah, so what are some of the systems in the brain that underlie reward and emotion? There's already been some very large-scale literature. We have a pretty good understanding of the brain systems that underlie experience of emotion and reward. So the idea is, if you're going to find a curved space beautiful, and if it's a feeling-driven response, this system is the one that should be engaged, all right? Now, in terms of the system of the brain that does visual spatial exploration, there's a really classic distinction in brain research between a neural system in the brain that perceives what something is that you're looking at, okay, which is this, and another system in the brain that's a dorsal system that really has to do with viewing things in space and doing visual spatial exploration. So we essentially argue that if people are going to be looking at higher ceilings that they will like more, and if that really has to do with understanding proportion that's driven by visual spatial exploration, the dorsal pathway in the brain will be activated. All right? So these are some of the spaces that we had. So curvilinear spaces, more curvilinear spaces. We had several hundred stimuli, of course. If you want them, I'll be more than happy to send them to you, because they've all been rated by several groups of people now. So these are rectilinear spaces, more rectilinear spaces. So these are high seating rooms, low seating rooms, okay? Now, how about the behavioral result? So in terms of behavioral judgment, yeah, when the rooms were round, people were more likely to find them beautiful than when they were square. So we got the basic behavioral effect, all right? At the level of the brain, the area of the brain that was activated more when people were looking at round versus square spaces was the anterior cingulate cortex. The anterior cingulate cortex is a core part of the brain, both in terms of experiencing reward, and it's part of the core emotion circuitry in the brain. In other words, this confirmed the prediction that we had in terms of A, people are going to find round rooms more beautiful, and it's probably going to be based on some kind of an emotional feeling-driven response. Then after people left the fMRI scanner, we had every single person rate every single image again on pleasantness, which is the valence dimension of the emotion circumflex. And as you can see, as beauty ratings go up, so do pleasantness ratings. In other words, people find round rooms more beautiful, and they find them more pleasant, and the area of the brain that's activated more is part of the core emotion circuitry in the brain, all right? Now, in terms of approach avoidance, and this is what I think is very important, so contour had an effect on beauty judgment, but had no effect on approach avoidance decisions. That's a very important distinction to keep in, because it's going to pop up again, all right? Then we look at seating height. Again, in terms of seating height, people find rooms with higher ceilings more beautiful, but they're no more likely to opt to enter them. So again, you see a dissociation between aesthetic judgments and approach avoidance decisions. All right? Now, in terms of the brain, if you remember, we predicted we would see activation in the dorsal path in the brain. That's exactly where we see it. So the precuneus and the middle frontal gyrus are part of the dorsal stream in the brain that underlies visual spatial exploration. So in other words, people find rooms with higher ceilings more beautiful, and that particular perception activates the navigation system in the brain, the one that does navigation and visual spatial exploration, but it doesn't lead to a greater likelihood to actually opt to enter them. 5 minutes, okay, great. So, the interesting thing to me, which is the one that I would like to jump to, is what I've been trying to emphasize earlier, is that, so you ask yourself, what is the difference between, why is it that a person can actually find a particular room aesthetically more pleasing, but not opt to enter it, okay? There's a number of different reasons. One of them that we talked about in our paper is a degree of perceived risk that goes into the particular choice. So in other words, if I show you a picture of a room and I tell you how aesthetically pleasing do you find this room to be, responding to that question actually involves no degree of risk at all. Okay? But if I ask you, do you want to enter that room? Okay, that calculation involves a different set of criteria, okay? And that, of course, might actually move your judgment to a different location. Another very interesting distinction in neuroscience, which I think has completely fascinated the field over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, is a distinction in the brain between a system that underlies liking versus the system that underlies wanting, okay? So for most everyday matters, people tend to completely confound them. You tend to think that you want what you like, but actually there are lots of things that you may want that you don't like, and vice versa. Okay, most of this work, of course, comes from the domain of addiction. Okay, wanting things that you don't like. Okay, and at the level of the brain, there's also a very nice dissociation between neural systems that underlie liking versus wanting. So, aesthetic preference is a liking judgment. All right. Wanting to actually enter a room is a wanting judgment, all right? So it's another set of behavioral data that kind of like consistent with the idea that there's actually some kind of a dissociation behaviorally between liking and wanting. And this may also be true at the level of brain function, all right? Okay, great. It looks like I might have 1 more minute. I want to talk about my friend's fantastic work that was done on the effect of expertise on brain function when people are looking at different kinds of stimuli. Okay. So the next study was done in Denmark. Not surprisingly, it's a recurrent theme. He and I are very good friends, Mark and Scott. Yeah. So here's what they did. So they recruited a bunch of people for this study, which actually I think is still quite rare for fMRI studies, that a bunch of people who were naive, with absolutely no expertise in architecture, and then they recruited a number of people who were basically graduate students and postgrads in architecture, all right? They had them go into the fMRI scanner, and they showed them 2 sets of stimuli that they had to rate in terms of how appealing they found them to be. One was a set of faces. I do faces studies. People sign up for these studies in 1 instant. Okay? You have them go into the fMRI scanner. I show you different kinds of pictures. You tell me how beautiful the face is. Who doesn't like that? All right? And of course, the second set of studies were buildings. Okay, so of course you'd expect to see no differences between architects and non-architects when they're looking at faces, because that's the control condition. But you'd expect to see differences only when you're looking at buildings. All right? So this is basically a representative trial. The person looks at a building and rates it on beauty from 1 to 5. If anybody wants to study this, I'll send you a copy, okay? Now, so I want to show you 2 results that I think are very interesting. Okay, fantastic, 2 minutes. Okay, so you may know that there's this region in the brain called the parahippocampal place area, right? It's a region of the brain that's very, very sensitive to detecting scenes, landscapes, places, and so forth, okay? So PPA, it's one of the best established areas in the brain. So if I show you a picture, for example, of rooms, spaces, caves, it very selectively activates, okay? So if this is basically the result at the level of the brain when people are looking at faces and buildings. So you can see those of expertise in buildings are showing significantly higher activation in the parahippocampal place area, but not for faces. In other words, but you don't see that effect amongst people with no expertise in architecture. So expertise in architecture actually activates the specific area in your brain that encodes spaces. Okay? The next one's even better. So this one is a parametric analysis, right? I've only 1 minute left. Okay, I have to do this quickly. So parametric. So this one is regions of the brain where activation in the brain co-varies with how much you like the space. Okay? So the 2 areas of the brain that are responding, the first one I've already talked about before, so you should know that, ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex. The second one is a classic reward region, the orbital frontal cortex.